Welcome to Picks with the Professor, the show where a real statistics professor
and his cousin
gives you sports betting tips. I'm your host, Professor Sides, and for the latest updates, information, and picks, you can follow me on Twitter at Professor Sides. You can follow my cousin Jared on Twitter at Cousin Jared. This college football episode covers select games from week 2 of the 2022 season. In case you're new here, I've built a mathematical model that predicts what the spread should be for every FBS college football game. That information, along with each team's power rating and a graded A, B, or C pick, either now or coming later for every game, is available in the Google Sheet that is linked in the show's description. That doesn't mean I recommend you do the same, as our goal in this episode is to share key information about this week's games, give you a few things to think on, and explain why certain plays are being made in order for you to come up with picks that you are comfortable with. I never recommend blindly tailing or fading any pick, but rather to hear the justifications and thought processes to make sure you're fully on board with us or against us before investing your hard-earned money. And as we go through the plays, remember there are no locks in game links. We'll give you our loves, likes, and leans to indicate my confidence level with respect to scaling wagers. So Jared will also be utilizing a weighted unit scale this college football season. And as always, please remember that good and bad variance will occur. So as much as I'd like to see it be profitable each and every week, that is an impossible reality for any gambler. Cousin Jared, week 1 is not even quite in the books yet. So a couple things to note. First off, what you're seeing in the sheet until we wrap up that Clemson game is unofficial. Some of these things may shift around a little bit. There'll be some extra calibration done. Week 1 games, I feel like we made a lot of really good picks and a lot of picks we wish we could have back. I mean, I feel like that's the way it goes, right?
Yep, exactly.
Yeah. I don't even know where to go looking back on it. I do want to say I want to comment real quick. I know that Jake had mentioned how much he liked Utah. We all talked about we liked Utah. Cam Rising, a fun player to watch. Utah looked really good last year. Made us a lot of money there towards the end of the season where we were writing them. I didn't say it at the time because I didn't want to dive into that rabbit hole, especially with 3 people, but he made the comment about them being a dark horse playoff contender. And I really wanted to say at the time, any Pac-12 team can't be a dark horse title contender because the Pac-12 always screws it up some way.
Yeah.
And I feel like that's what we saw again with Utah. They were in that game. They obviously had a chance to win it, played really well, but like, had they won that game, that sets them up, for a good resume victory over an SEC school on the road across the country. And that doesn't mean they can't make the playoff now. Obviously, if they were on the table, they'll be in the talk, but
right.
Pac-12, starting off, always just shooting themselves in the foot. Just can't get out of their own way with regards to making the playoff.
Yeah. And it's just year after year they find a way. I know some other shows out there are like, hey, we had the same conversation the first Saturday of every college football season, but the Pac-12 has already found a way to get themselves out of the playoff, and so it feels like here we go again. I guess we're going to talk about we're going to touch on a couple of things during this show of what happened this past week as we discuss some of the teams that their games this coming week. We'll touch on what happened last week. The first thing I want to say is like James Madison. I guess every school should just move up to FBS because this is easy. You can just come up here and blow out teams like it's nothing.
Yeah.
Welcome to FBS, James Madison.
Yeah.
North Texas, man. I think SMU might be pretty salty this year, or like better than I think. North Texas definitely had some missed opportunities in that game, but man, SMU looked really good. And I was like completely right.
SMU doing to UNT what people wondered, what I know you and Jake both wondered if Houston could do to UTSA, which is say a good American team is much better than a good Conference USA team. And SMU just really putting the conference in their place.
Yeah.
Houston not quite doing that, but SMU really, really just saying like there's a divide between these two conferences. UNT a good team for Conference USA, but was really outclassed. And like you said, SMU pretty solid team.
Yeah. And then the clunker game of the
what was
week.
that last thing you were going to say?
Well, the last thing I was going to say was the clunker game for the week for this entire show was the UMass and Tulane game, where we just needed one score from the middle of the third quarter on, one touchdown for the rest of the game.
Yep.
Would have given the professor the cover, would have given me at least a push on the total, and we couldn't get that. They went scoreless in the middle of the third quarter on the rest of the game, and so we both turned out to be losers. So that is the clunker of the week for the show for sure.
Well, that and I don't know what you were. I don't think you had an official pick on it, but Jake and I both starting us off with Tennessee and Ball State. And on Thursday, that was kind of a clunker too, him having the under and me taking the points with Ball State. And a game where Ball State just, if they play the same, I think that first half yards were like 300 to 200 and Ball State was down like 40 at the half. It was like, it was really an impressive performance by Ball State to figure out a way to, with the failed fourth downs and the turnovers, just like a game that they should have been down like 17 at the half and like we all would have been alive, but that was also kind of a frustrating one.
It was.
But yeah, we'll, like you said, we'll talk about a lot of what happened in week one as we get to those teams playing in week two. But before we get to that, some reminders, please hit that like button if you're on YouTube. Also, if you are yet, please consider subscribing or following. It's free and the only way, assuming you turn notifications on to ensure you don't miss any college basketball, MLB, or college football content that this channel provides. Share with a friend if you know others in the game. Hit us up on Twitter or drop a comment on YouTube. We love those and try to respond to as many as we can. And a reminder, we've started up a Patreon page for those of you who want to support the show. Membership starts at just $3 per month. Benefits include things such as exclusive access to our Discord, where me and my co-hosts are constantly talking about plays, line movements, and general fun sports things. And both ad-free and early access to the show. That's right. All shows are now being recorded at night. So if you're a night owl, this is the way to get the shows right when they're done recording instead of the following morning. Note that I have the tentative times shows will be released on the website at www.pickswiththeprofessor.com/schedule. Cousin Jared, let's get to the games. All lines courtesy of BetOnline. Sign up in the show description and current as of the time of this recording on late Sunday night. We've got 2 Friday games here this week. No Thursday games. We're going to cover both Friday games here, so the rest of the episodes will cover just the Saturday games. First one here, Louisville at UCF. UCF is a 6.5-point favorite at home. Louisville getting embarrassed at Syracuse, a game we talked about last week with Syracuse, just kind of saying like that place is a place where Syracuse might, be able to hang around and plays close games or wins some games, and embarrassed Louisville. I mean, there's definitely some things to talk about with Louisville. I don't know how deep we'll get into it, but there's some question marks there. Model says that UCF is a much better team than Louisville. Says this should be a 9.3 point spread, so 9 or 9.5. So it's an A-grade pick for me on UCF at -6.5. I love that it's less than a touchdown, and if it lands right on 7, we are winners here. I think UCF, most likely scenarios, would be winning by 6, 7, or 10, and in 2 of those 3 were winners. So obviously I'd love 6 even more, but I'm thrilled with 6.5. I think it's a great number. I'm on UCF laying just under a touchdown. Cousin Jared, what do you think about this one?
Louisville, don't trust them as far as I can throw them. They week 1 and they have just completely gone off the rails for me. They're one of those teams where I don't think the points really matter. Like if you think they're going to win, just play them on the money line or lay a whole bunch of points with them if they're favorites, because the points aren't going to matter. They're going to blow somebody out, they're going to lose, and it's going to look really ugly. So Louisville, don't trust them at all. Not going to touch them for probably at least a month.
All right. One other Friday game, 9 p.m. Eastern, Boise State at New Mexico. This one a conference game. Always interesting when we get these conference games this early. Boise State should obviously be road favorites. They've got more talent than New Mexico. Nobody would question that. The question is, how much should they be favored by? The model says they should be favored by about 15. The fact that we can get 17, I'm comfortable taking the points here, all 17 of them with New Mexico. It's a B-grade pick for me. It's hard to say this could ever be an A pick. I mean, if you gave me like 20, 21, it would be an A-grade pick, but I don't see that happening. You'd never know, of course. It's a lot of points, and Boise State's obviously a lot better of a team. So, I mean, like I said, unless it gets really high, it's not an A grade. But I think New Mexico's worth an investment here, getting all these points in a conference game. You'll see the total there on the screen of 46. A total this low means they're not expecting a lot of points. It's going to be hard for Boise State to win by a bunch of points if they're not scoring a bunch of points, if it's low scoring. New Mexico doesn't have to score that many times to cover this one. And Boise State, another team with question marks. I mean, both these road teams are on these Friday night games, a lot of question marks. Boise State should have an easier go of it than Louisville. But watching that Boise State team against Oregon State, they put the backup quarterback in the second quarter, and it was clear he was not expecting to play. This was not a rotation type setup. I mean, that was an early season. Like, they looked clueless, and they went to the backup, and they liked what he offered. Things got better, but like that's only because they couldn't really get worse.
They could not get worse. No.
Yeah. And so I have a lot of questions about Boise State. They took quite a hit in the power ratings. New Mexico, apparently not terrible. 113th out of 131, I guess. I feel like New Mexico's usually like in the 120s, so up to 113 is a solid improvement for them.
It is.
Obviously, New Mexico, like I said, is really bad. And New Mexico's really bad, but I mean, what I saw with Boise State offensively, I'm concerned if they can score enough points to cover such a big number like this. So give me 17. At 16.5, I like it a whole lot less. It's really that push protection on 17. 17 is a fairly reasonable outcome in this game. Obviously, New Mexico might lose by 20-21, but I mean, they could easily lose by 13 or 14 as well. I just want to make Boise State prove that they can be competent offensively, because they were the furthest thing from that late Saturday night here in week 1. So I'm on New Mexico plus 17 B grade pick. Cousin Jared, what do you got?
So my issue with this game is that, well, let me say, I would not be taking the points with New Mexico here, but I can't bring myself to back Boise State either. I think what I think about is week 2 of last season, Boise State went and played at UCF first week of the season. It's a hard-fought game. It was a close loss. They came back home the next week. They played UTEP, who UTEP was better than New Mexico, but UTEP still not a fantastic team by the ratings. And they just Boise State just absolutely kicked the crap out of UTEP at home week 2 last season. And I mean, it was like 52-14 or something like that. The thing is that was coming off a close loss to a UCF team that still had Dylan Gabriel at the time. And man, Boise State just looked so bad that I feel like the mentality of the team is just probably not in the same spot they were week 2 last season versus this season. So if I had to,
I'd love to be a fly on the wall.
Yes.
Hearing what's going on there for sure.
Yeah. So if I had to make a play, I would lay the points with Boise State. I think this is going to be one of the only opportunities. The Mountain West is a fairly tough conference. I think this is going to be one of their only opportunities to really kind of put the pedal to the floor here and really crush somebody this season. I don't feel comfortable enough to make a play on it. But because if they don't kind of really let out all of the demons on New Mexico, when are they going to do it this season? They may not have it in them if they don't do it here.
Yeah. No, it's you're not wrong there. I cannot help but think, like you said last year, a close loss, a game they were in, hard fought, and this one not so much. I mean, and Oregon State turned the ball over several times and really tried to keep Boise in the game, and they just couldn't do it.
Yep.
It is interesting, you talk about coming into the season, we knew that Boise State had all the injury problems last year and a down season for them. And so this year things are going to get going better for them. You just wonder, is it possible that this year is worse than last year? Is it possible that this is a downward trend for them and the glory days are gone for Boise State? I mean, obviously we don't know, and we'll look back on this season, in 2 months and 3 months, we'll have a better idea. But I mean, what I saw from them in week 1 was extremely concerning. It's the worst I've ever seen a Boise team look. And I say that because I don't remember seeing Boise before they really rose to prominence. They weren't on television. We didn't have as many channels, right? I mean, we just didn't see every game like we did back then. So I'm sure Boise's looked worse, absolutely, but they weren't on TV back then, and we didn't have the streaming services. We didn't have the internet like we do now. I mean, it's been how many years since Boise's looked this bad? I mean, I just can't get in my head just how terrible they looked offensively. And that's the key to this game of winning by 17 is they're going to have to score a bunch of points. And I think New Mexico uglies this game up. I think it's low scoring. It's a really low total of 46. I know I'm not going to be able to talk you into under 46 on this one, Cousin Jared, but I wonder if this is a game. This is just, I know you're just like, no, the number's way too low. I know. But it feels like one of those, like, the odds makers are hanging a really low total and daring you to go under because they're like, they know that people will take the over blindly because of this number. And I'm not saying you shouldn't. I'm not saying, I'm wondering if this is one of those, like, games that's going to be, 21-7 or something like that, and it's not even going to sniff the 40s because these two teams offensively, I'm just not sure either one of them is going to be able to get it going. It feels like an ugly game. It feels like a game that on a Friday night puts you to sleep if you're not out doing something with friends or family or whatever. It feels like a game that if you were trying to watch it, you aren't going to be able to stay awake for personally.
Yeah, don't watch.
Speaking of Snooze Fest. Yeah, speaking of Snooze Fest, Saturday at noon Eastern, Cousin Jared's new favorite team, Duke. We had them featured in this spot last week, and I made the comment, like, I didn't really know which way to take it. I laid the points with Duke. I was like, hey, I feel a little more optimistic about him, but the model said the number was pretty right. Duke played very well, and their defense looked really good. And I told y'all I thought the number was right, but Cousin Jared had to play. And lo and behold, we have the exact same scenario this week. Duke at Northwestern. The model says this should be Northwestern minus 9.9. And this is Northwestern minus 10. So another really well-priced game. Just as last week, I'll take Duke. I just think there's optimism around Duke. I think the ceiling's higher for Duke, whereas Northwestern, I kind of think we know as good as they can be. They've won the division 2 of the last 4 years, whatever now. We kind of know what Northwestern can be. Duke obviously has been historically a bad team, but I think the ceiling might be a little bit higher on them. And so they might hang in this game, low scoring game. Give me 10 points. Let's see what happens. It's not one I feel really confident on. Also, I will note that as of the time of this recording, you never know where numbers are going, but there are some 10.5s out there. 10.5 is a little bit more exciting grabbing that because, Duke plus 10 right now, we just push if it lands right on 10. If it gets to 11, now you're talking about maybe a little bit more of an exciting pick as well. But again, here at this number, it's kind of a pass. But I'll tell you again, the same thing I told you last week. I think Cousin Jared's got the better play on this one. He's going to talk about the total, which is hanging at 56.5.
Yeah, so we all know where I'm going with this one, guys. I'm taking the under 56.5 here. I told you last week that Elko would have the defense ready to play at Duke, and sure enough, got their first shutout against an FBS team since I believe the late 80s. So a really good defensive effort, obviously much better even than I anticipated. Yeah, it was quite the feat there. Northwestern is not Temple, is what I will say to those who may be expecting another shutout.
Yeah.
I would not expect another shutout, but same thing. I think that the Duke defense is going to be ready to play. And even though Northwestern it seemed like the offense got going, obviously in the second half against Nebraska, let's take it with a grain of salt, people. That's Nebraska. They're going to find a way to kind of give things away. And that's exactly what I think you're not going to get with this Duke defense under Elko. They're going to be solid. Again, they're not going to have a shutout. They're not going to have a bunch of mental lapses and a bunch of penalties and stuff like that. So sign me up for the under 56.5. I think both these teams want to kind of play solid defense. I think especially Northwestern wants to run the ball. They don't want to have to air it out. We kind of know what Pat Fitzgerald likes to do on offense there. So I think the under 56.5 is a great play here.
Yeah, and I'm curious, 56, a key-ish number. You might land right on 56. You can end up with one team getting 2 field goals, deciding to go for 2 and getting it back to the touchdowns. Obviously, it could just be touchdowns. With these, you have to assume there's going to be some field goals involved. 55, probably more of a key number than 56. But 56 a key number. I'm curious. I'm assuming you would tell people still to play under 56. I'm assuming still under 55.5, and 55 is kind of you're like, you stop liking it. Is that right on that?
I would play it under 55 as well. 54.5 is where I would start thinking more critically about it.
Yeah, and although to be completely fair, and I completely agree with you, at some point we have to make sound statistical plays. I do wonder if this is the same setup as that Boise State New Mexico game, though, where if it's not even going to sniff the 50s. We talk about that sometimes on the total. Sometimes the number matters, and sometimes it doesn't matter, right? North Carolina App State, right, where we talked about the over, and I was like, I think this game could get blown out, in the third quarter, right? Sometimes the number doesn't matter, right? But you want to be smart with your plays. But I agree. I think this under makes a lot of sense. it could land, right on 54, 55, right, 56. But I do feel like getting to the 50s is going to be harder for these two teams, given the styles they like to play. Also at noon Eastern, Missouri at Kansas State. Kansas State is an 8-point favorite. A lot of hype around Kansas State, and I agree. I think Kansas State's going to be a really good team this year. I'm on Missouri getting 8 points. The model says this should be Kansas State -6. It's all about the number here, the +8. If this is +7, I'm a whole lot less excited about it. But at +8, knowing that if Kansas State wins by 6 or 7, which are probably the two most likely outcomes, the fact that we're winners, I think there's value here on Missouri. It's not a play I'm running to the window to make, just because the fact that I think Kansas State will be a really good team. It's a tough place to play. I'm giving Kansas State a little bit more of a home field advantage than most teams. But unless you got to Missouri +10, +11, like I said, I'm not running to the window to make this. But SEC is a good conference. I feel like Missouri can hang in there in this one. Like I said, I think Kansas State could win a close one. A lot of ways Kansas State still wins and Missouri covers this. It's a B-grade pick for me on Missouri. The game has a total of 56. Cousin Jared, what do you think?
No play for me right now, but just looking at the numbers here, I might be leaning towards the over 56 in this spot. The Missouri defense has been nothing to write home about for at least a season and a half now. Again, we talked about it in either one of the previous shows or last week or week 0. I can't remember, about Vanderbilt running all over the Missouri. About the Vanderbilt running all over the Missouri defense last season. Man, if Vanderbilt can do that to Missouri last year, I got news for you. Kansas State and Deuce Vaughn will probably be able to do the exact same thing. Yeah. And the Missouri offense is solid.
Deuce Vaughn and his Deuce Vaughn is like ninth year at Kansas State, it feels like.
Yes, it does. Him and Darren Sproles both there for 8 years. So anyway, I think that this game could potentially get pointsy, and so no official play for me. But if this line total were to come down a little bit more, the over is kind of where my attention would be drawn to.
Yeah, and it's interesting. The last thing I'll say about this game is that both of these teams, according to the model, in the mid 30s and 40s with regards to their rating. I think it's two teams that, if things go their way, can have really good seasons. Missouri, it's of course that defense. If they can get that short up, they're going to be a pretty solid team. Kansas State, with Adrian Martinez now coming in to play quarterback, always a solid team. But if they can just kind of shore up a couple things here and there, if things go right for either one of these teams, both these teams have the possibility of being pretty good. But both of them, might just end up being mediocre. And so I think there's a lot of variability with both of them, which makes it really interesting. Because Jared, you're maybe thinking about an over, especially depending on what the number does. I'm taking 8 with Missouri. I think it's just too many points. Like I said, getting more than a touchdown, I think, makes sense here. And a game that should be a good one, should be a close one. Yep. A similar story also at noon Eastern, South Carolina at Arkansas. Arkansas, an 8-point home favorite. Two teams that are projected to be a little bit better quality-wise, but the same story, the home team, a little bit better. But again, as with that one, the model says 8 is too many. Model says more like 6.5. I'm grabbing the 8 with South Carolina with a B-grade play. Arkansas coming off of a huge win at home against Cincinnati. I'm not saying it's a letdown spot. Obviously, it's a conference game. I very rarely try to project things like that. But more of a physical game. They had to play for the full, 60 minutes on that one. Might affect things here. South Carolina, took care of business in week 1, like we talked about them needing to do. I just think it's too many points. I think it's a tight game. Give me the 8 points with South Carolina in a situation where I'm not sure Arkansas is as good as people who just see the score of last week's game are going to think. Cincinnati really shot themselves in the foot all game long. Cincinnati looked pretty solid to me, and I'm not sure if that's both these teams are really good or neither of them are that good. But I'm just not quite – I think Arkansas is solid. I'm just not quite sold on them yet. I think they were gifted a lot of opportunities in that game. And there's a real chance if that game happens again that Arkansas loses by 14 at home. And if that's the case, I think we're viewing this game a whole lot differently. So I think 8's too many points. I think it should be 6 or 7. Again, some value here. Just like with Missouri, it's a B-grade play for me, grabbing those 8 points on South Carolina. Cousin Jared, what do you think?
Both of these teams. Okay, so what I'll say is I was impressed with the Arkansas offense. I thought they played well, and obviously that Cincinnati defense is still solid. And so I was definitely thought the Arkansas offense played well. Man, South Carolina, I was expecting more from the offense this past week against Georgia State. So South Carolina beat Georgia State 35-14. Spencer Rattler and all the Oklahoma fans, I'm sure you'll be telling us about it in the comments here, only averaged 6 yards per attempt on Saturday. Through
I don't think they're going to be telling us about this in the comments. I think they're just going to be like sadly nodding, be like,
yeah, that's right.
I'd have told you.
Yeah, exactly. The 2 interceptions. South Carolina as a team only averaged 2.5 yards per rush. That includes sacks. So, maybe closer to
defenses in the state of Georgia are historically good.
Some parts of Georgia, maybe. Georgia State, not necessarily known.
Not that one? Oh.
Yeah, it's for the salty defense. So I guess what I wanted to say is I completely agree with you. If you didn't watch the Arkansas-Cincinnati game closely, you could kind of be thrown off a little bit by the final score of that game. But the problem is you can look at South Carolina and really dive into it. South Carolina's defense played good, but
got the touchdown on the blocked punt, I believe.
Yeah, but South Carolina's offense was not good at all. And so I'm not going to back South Carolina in this spot. If I had to, I would probably lay the points with Arkansas, but you're exactly right. There's body blow theory. Arkansas had to play, the full game, where South Carolina, at middle of the third quarter into third quarter, they kind of knew the game was
the spread was in question. For the third quarter, but I mean the game really wasn't for most of it.
Yeah,
once they got in the mid third quarter or whatever.
Yeah, so I would just tell you, viewer, make sure you do your research on this game, because I think both of these games probably don't look exactly. The box scores from last week probably don't look exactly how you would have thought the game would have gone in your head. So just do your research here is all I'm telling you.
And it's going to be a fascinating matchup because, like you said, that Arkansas defense didn't really look that good against Cincinnati. They got some turnovers and they forced some missed field goals, I guess is how you'd say that. But their defense didn't look very good. But South Carolina's offense didn't look that good. So what's going to happen there? And then, like you said, that South Carolina defense looked really good. They're going to come out to play, but Arkansas's offense looked good. So, I mean, it's going to be a strength on strength and weakness on weakness, which is going to make for a really compelling matchup. I will say, I think the model's a little bit lower on both of these teams after that last week performance than maybe the viewers are. Again, I have Arkansas ranked 22nd right now, and I think most people are ready to crown them as a top 10 team at this point. And again, 22nd for them, like I said, I'm kind of like you, like they weren't that impressive. South Carolina have at 36. I think people at this point, SEC had a great weekend first week. I think people are saying all those SEC teams need to be top 25 teams. And I'm kind of like, not so fast. I think these teams are a little bit worse than maybe people think. Because like you said, there were some issues underlying both of those wins. Both teams got it done, but things that need to get fixed and things that absolutely can get fixed. It's early in the season, but things that we have questions about going forward that you never know how it's going to play out. One more noon game to cover here: Wake Forest at Vanderbilt. Okay. Hawaii is terrible, obviously.
It all comes back to Hawaii is terrible.
It all comes back to Hawaii on this one. And boy, I'm so pumped to talk about Michigan, Hawaii later on in the week. I think we're going to wait on.
We may have just been talking about that before we came on air here.
We may have. I think we're going to wait to bring Jake on that one because I feel like he should get involved in the action. I think he would have something fun to say too.
Yeah.
Hawaii's terrible, obviously. That Vanderbilt did what they did, though. Maybe Vanderbilt is like just a very bad SEC team and not like one of the worst ever SEC teams, right? Like, I think maybe we can all agree to that. Yeah. The model ranks Vanderbilt now 68th. Now, part of that is as we've talked about, right? Like, you should be mediocre just because you're in the SEC and the athletes you can recruit. And I think the model is kind of picking up on that and saying what they did to Hawaii again. This was an interesting one because we have a second data point now with Hawaii where we don't have for a bunch of teams, and we do for some FCS stuff, but that's not as great a data. But we have a second data point now for Hawaii. And so part of it is, that was Vanderbilt going on the road and just looking pretty good. And so I think the model's kind of trying to trend Vanderbilt towards you ought to be decent because of the conference you're in allows you to recruit at a higher level. Obviously, Vanderbilt's not good, but the model now thinks Vanderbilt's just more of a middle-of-the-pack team, which still puts them probably dead last in the SEC, but middle of the pack overall, which would allow them to hang in with Wake Forest. Wake Forest, who the model just is not really a believer in, losing a lot of pieces from last year, and last year not having a defense whatsoever.
Yeah.
It's funny because if this game happened last year, I feel like this would be Wake Forest. Maybe they did play last year. I don't know if they did, but I feel like with last year's teams, this should be Wake Forest minus like 20, and you'd probably lay the points and just say Vanderbilt's literally never going to stop them.
Right.
This year, a different story. The model says on the road, this should be Wake Forest minus 2.5. It's an A grade pick for Vanderbilt, +7 for me. It's all about the number at the +7. It's an A grade, that push protection there. I have no idea what type of game is going to be played here. I think we're going to learn a lot about both teams that there's a lot of question marks on. I just think +7 is too many on the road for a Wake Forest team that might not be as good as last year and a Vanderbilt team that might be 10. 3-4 makes a lot more sense for this game, even 6, but 7 just seems like way too much. So I'm going to grab the 7 points of Vanderbilt. It's an A grade play for me, just out of principle of the pure value play, crossing so many key numbers here at +7 for the home team. Kissinger, what do you got for us on just a fascinating game, in my opinion?
Yeah, so I don't usually call out the model like this, but I think the model is just wrong on Vanderbilt. I think it's giving
Vanderbilt.
I think it's giving them way too much respect. So, viewer, what I would tell you is if you are going to back Vanderbilt in this game, don't do it because of what the model says. Do it because Sam Hartman is still out for Wake Forest. Still not sure when he's going to come back. And that Wake Forest defense last year was just terrible. And basically in many facets of the game. And so you maybe you tell yourself, hey, Vanderbilt's going to be able to move the ball, control the clock, run, get 3, 4, 5 yards consistently on that defense. And that's how you're able to cover with this Vanderbilt number here. Me personally, like, just in the context, we're talking about Wake Forest here, and what Dave Clawson has done there, I think is just really unbelievable. And so, coupling that with the fact that I think the model is a little higher on Vanderbilt than it should be, I'm not taking the points with Vanderbilt here just because I have too much respect for Dave Clawson, regardless of whether Hartman's out, regardless of how bad their defense was. I think that Clawson is going to find a way to put away this Vanderbilt team, which, again, I think the model is a little too high on. So no official play for me here. I'm just telling you, if you want to take the points with Vanderbilt, do it because of something you see in Wake Forest and not just because of what the model's saying about Vanderbilt.
I'm going to call my shot. I'm going to say Vanderbilt wins that right.
Wow. I would be shocked.
I'm going to call it. I think they went out right. I think they won. I think that Wake Forest will not be able to stop Vanderbilt. That defense is absolutely terrible. And games in Vanderbilt, I think this is the first time there's any excitement for that football team in 5 years. Ish.
Yeah.
I don't know. A
while. Yeah.
And I think anything can happen. I think it's going to be a tight game late. I'm going to call my shot, say Vanderbilt wins. And
wow.
When Vanderbilt loses by 42, just remind me that I said that.
Okay, I will. I'm honestly, I'm too caught off guard to like make a bet on this. I will start like coming up with ideas where we can have some sort of like gruesome punishment for the loser of one of these bets. We can go head to head on this stuff. I'm too caught off guard to do it right now. But later in the season, as we have these, I will come up with something for some kind of stakes for this type of bet, because I would definitely be on the opposite side of you on this one.
All I'm saying is Vanderbilt's like plus like 200 or something. I'm just saying the money line's right there. You know,
yeah,
it's gonna pay handsomely.
Yeah.
All right.
Wow.
3:30. I've flustered cousin Jared, everyone.
Yeah, I'm done.
I don't know how
for the rest of the show
happen on this show.
Yeah.
No, you want to talk about this one here. 3:30 Eastern. Memphis at Navy. A Navy team that the model last year just hated. And Navy was bad last year, but the model hated them a little bit too much. It's like it kind of was like reacting to how bad they were, but it like overreacted just a little bit. And Navy was really, really bad, but the model was just a little bit too down on them. This year, I'm not sure that's possible. Navy looks like a shipwreck. I should say a shipwreck, not a train wreck. They look like a shipwreck. Yeah. Model ranks him down all the way to 114. Memphis is a 6.5 point road favorite. A grade play for me on Memphis at -6.5. The model says it should be 10.7, so 10.5 or 11. I love this is under a touchdown. This Navy team, I feel like, is heading for a really bad season. I think Memphis is going to blow them out of the water. I think Navy's the type of team, these triple offense type teams, when they go up against somebody who's in a higher class than them, and I'm not saying that Memphis is that great. Memphis is just a middle of the road team. But when they go up against a team that's better than them, that can shut that offense down, Navy just goes 3 and out. Their defense gets tired. And I don't think that's going to be a recipe for success here with the Navy offense just going 3 and out left and right, and their defense all over on the field for the entire game. So I've got Memphis -6.5. A grade play for me. I just think this is not enough points. I do not think this Navy team is any good. Because Jared, what do you got?
Navy lost to Delaware 14-7 at home last week. I don't know what this number would have been, and I probably would have laid the points with Memphis. So official play for me here, I'm laying the 6.5 with Memphis as well. You could definitely nitpick with Memphis for sure. Like, they were never really in that game against Mississippi State, but we'll talk about Mississippi State
from the opening bell. I mean,
yeah. We'll talk about Mississippi State later in the show here, but me personally, I think that has a lot to do with Mississippi State and not as much to do with Memphis necessarily. I think Mississippi State's going to be pretty good this year, and I do have to say that I mean, if I were somebody else in the SEC West, say like maybe Texas A&M or something like that, I'm more worried about Mississippi State than I was maybe a couple of weeks ago. But anyway, so I think this game, I think Memphis is going to run away with it again. Navy lost at home to Delaware. If you go back and look at Navy's season last year, the model, really what we're just learning from this is that the model can see the future, because the model knew that Navy was going to be really bad. You take out the Army game last season, because that
which was very impressive.
Yeah,
but yes, absolutely, yeah.
But that game is just so unique.
Throw out the record books.
Yeah, exactly. They beat Temple. They beat Tulsa, which hasn't quite been in the same echelon as Memphis has been. And then Navy did beat UCF last year. Mm-hmm. Navy's just
UCF had a wonky season though last year.
They really did. And Navy's just always one of those teams that's going to pop up and beat somebody that they shouldn't.
They are, as bad as Navy is, they're probably still going to have one game this year that they either hang in that they shouldn't. I think they hung it with Cincinnati last year as well.
Yeah, and Houston, they did.
Yeah, they're going to have a game like that where they hang in or they win or whatever. We're all confused, but that's partially just the style. And it's like you can't predict when that's going to happen. It's going to happen, but it's not going to be every week. Not with this team.
But even those games where they hung in there, Houston, SMU, Cincinnati, all of them were 7 or 8 points. So, even when they're hanging in there, hasn't been 1 or 2 or 3 points or whatever. They've still been, the team's been able to cover a 6.5.
Because there's a reason this total's right at 49. There are no field goals in Navy games, right? Their defense either gets a stop or gives up a touchdown. Their offense doesn't kick field goals because, their offense is only going to kick a field goal if it's like 4th and 12 from the 13. Like, they're going to kick a field goal then. But otherwise, they find themselves in 4th and shorts and they go for it, or they find themselves in 4th down on their side on the field and they punt. Like, there's just, that's why they always end up losing by 7 if it's tight. Because I watch this and there's going to be like 5 field goals in this game, but like there's just not a lot of field goals in Navy games the way they play.
Yeah, and so where I'm going with this is that when you see a line like this with Navy, don't be scared off of it, because you're going to be able to lay 6.5, 7, 6, something like that. You're going to be able to lay that, probably 3, 4, 5 times throughout the season with Navy, and there's going to be one game where it's going to just completely roll back in your face and it's going to blow up, and you're not going to have a chance. They're going to beat somebody they shouldn't. But more often than not, you're going to cover that number with Navy for all the reasons we've outlined here. So again, I have no problem. I'm laying the 6.5 here.
Yeah, I completely agree. Like you just said, we could have had the whole analysis of this as Navy lost to Delaware at home and then just move on with life, right? I will say I looked back at after If this game had happened last week, the model would have said that Memphis -7 would have been the right line. Memphis gets a little bit of a downgrade, didn't really look good against Mississippi State, just not the downgrade that Navy gets. And so, again, this is a solid look-ahead line. But after what we saw last week, and that's the thing with the model, is trying to help us figure out what should we overreact to and what should we not overreact to. But I mean, Navy losing home to Delaware, I feel like we should overreact to that.
That qualifies.
Yeah, it qualifies. Another one that question mark, should we overreact? I honestly don't know. This one's the one that we just don't have a ton of data. You talked about it at the top. James Madison.
Yeah.
How do you do? I mean, just looking fantastic against a Middle Tennessee team that we thought might have a chance to surprise some people this year.
Went to a bowl game last year, won 7 games last year.
There you go. And now the question is Middle Tennessee, not anywhere near what we thought, or is James Madison just a lot better? The model now puts James Madison more at the middle of the pack. So, I mean, a lot of questions around Middle Tennessee. Exactly how do we view them? It's hard to say. We'll learn a lot about Middle Tennessee and James Madison both after we get some more games on their belt. But after one game, the model does give Middle Tennessee a ding, just not by that much, and says that you should grab the 7.5 points at Colorado State, mainly because both of these teams the model doesn't think is very good. Obviously, we talk about Conference USA being one of the weaker conferences. Almost all of the Conference USA teams are down towards the bottom of the pack. So it has Middle Tennessee State at 117, but Colorado State, the model has at 110. Bottom line is if both these teams are in the hundreds, unless you're talking about one of them in the bottom 4, a 7.5 point spread is just too much for two bad football teams. Who the heck knows what's going to happen? But 7.5 is just too many points. Again, model says it should be 5.5. And so again, crossing two key numbers at 6 and 7 here. It's an A grade pick for me, grabbing 7.5. It's probably still an A grade at 7. It's A minus maybe. 6.5 is a whole lot different story because again, Colorado State, the two most likely outcomes are won by 6 and 7. And both of those we cashed, given plus 7.5. I love this number. I love the hook here. Don't really like either one of these teams. I'm down on both of them. I was hopeful for Middle Tennessee State, and they still might be a decent Conference USA team, but wasn't a great showing in week 1 at least. Now, if James Madison runs the table, we'll look back and say maybe it's a different story, right? I don't think that's going to happen though. Because Joe, what do you got for us on this one?
Well, you know what they say: fool me once, shame on you. I'm not going to give you a second chance to fool me again. So I'm not touching.
I don't think that's the quote.
Well,
I actually thought about that quote when I was making this play. I was thinking, fool me once, fool me twice. It's like, I'm going to do it one more time. One more time.
Well, I'm cutting myself off at 1. I've been fooled. I'm not messing with Middle Tennessee State here. And mostly that is because I obviously, like, we don't know anything about Colorado State at this point. New team, so many new players, and then playing Michigan last week. Like, of course, Michigan was just going to trounce them. I'm not going to hold it against them that they only scored 7 points.
Hold on. Let's just stop. And just while we're here, the viewers have to know why you did not play Michigan. We talked about it all week. We talked about last year. We talked about the model being on Michigan. You even said it yourself. You were going to regret it. I mean, I feel like you owe the viewers an explanation.
Well, this is about Colorado State. This isn't about Michigan, really.
All right, okay, fine.
Well, no, the thing I'm more upset about is that if everybody goes to my Twitter, and on Friday I had my Friday lunchtime thoughts, and I said that you should be on the Michigan under. I was waiting for 62. Never got there. Kind of hung around 61.5, 60.5, and of course the under hit. So I'm much more upset at myself for not playing the under in the Michigan game, which again, those also, when they weren't playing like Michigan State or Ohio State, those unders in the Michigan games were always coming through as well. So I feel dumber about
really
that. But this is about Colorado State right now. Okay. I'm not going to hold it against them. They only scored 7.
But we're just one step away from bringing up Hawaii again. So I'm just saying it's there on the table for us.
It is. We'll probably touch on every show this week.
Yeah. So no play here for you on Middle Tennessee. I love, like I said, I'm trying it a second time. I think less about Middle Tennessee and more about Colorado State. I just don't think they're that good. It's less about the Michigan thing and just more about, I didn't think they were that good coming into the season. And I didn't see anything against Michigan that makes me think they can be a competent football team. And not that I would have expected them ever to go in and win, but I think if they were the type of team that I was like, oh yeah, you can win by more than a touchdown for sure against another bad team, I was expecting to see at least a little bit of a pulse against Michigan, which we didn't see. So I think it's about Colorado State not being very good. So I'll grab the touchdown and the hook there in that one. Speaking of teams from the state of Michigan, 4 p.m. Eastern, Michigan State is hosting Akron. Michigan State good, Akron bad. I mean, is it really like much more than that? I mean, I'm grabbing Michigan State minus 34.5. I'm grabbing it early in the week because I think this number is going to go up. And if it doesn't, it should go up. I think I took – and now Michigan State I was questionable about last week at 22, and that one pushed. But as it dropped to 21, I said, that's a bad move. I liked Michigan State there. They covered the 21. But both Michigan and Michigan State – I'm just running the same playbook as last year, which is early on in the season. They're a little bit undervalued. They're well coached. They're solid teams that are going to go out there and take care of business. I think this is kind of like the Michigan-Colorado State game. I mean, I actually have Akron worse than Colorado State. Obviously, I have Michigan State behind Michigan, but I think it's the same sort of thing. I think this is just going to be a drubbing. I'd rather have 34 because I think 34 is a possibility here. But honestly, the more I thought about it, 34 is more of a possibility with Michigan State kicking 2 field goals. And I don't see Akron stopping Michigan State. I don't see them scoring field goals. I think Michigan State's going to score touchdowns or they're going to punt. I just don't. I feel like as Michigan State gets rolling, I just think it's going to be a lot of touchdowns. Michigan State, we saw last year, can get really, with the explosive big play, can get going with that. And Akron's the type of team that's going to allow that. I mean, I think Michigan State is more likely to – I'm going to go on a limb here, and I'm going to say it's more likely that Michigan State wins by 36 than 34, or the same thing being more likely by 29 than 27 or whatever the higher numbers that. I think it's more likely that Akron kicks 2 field goals than Michigan State kicks 2 field goals. Obviously, one team could just kick 1 or whatever, or they could each kick 1. But I'm just saying, I think the more I thought about it, the more I'm thinking that 35 is actually probably more likely than 34. And I think 36 is more likely than 34, given who I think kicks the field goals. The model agrees and says this should be Michigan State minus 37. I'm grabbing it here. I'm grabbing it early in the week. I'm just afraid this is going to go up because in general, people tend to bet favorites as the week goes on. Not always, but more times than not. And so I want to lock this in at what I think will be a solid number. If it goes down any and we miss out, I think that's fine. I think 34.5's okay. I think Michigan State just kills them. Because Jared, what do you think?
Well, the fighting Joe Moorheads at Akron, I have to say they had a great 7-point win against St. Francis, Pennsylvania on Saturday.
I think that was an overtime game too, wasn't it?
It was in overtime. That is correct. And if this is
we could just stop the analysis there, right?
Yeah, and if this is the college basketball podcast, wow, great 7-point win against St. Francis, Pennsylvania, Akron. Yeah. That's really coming through. Problem, this is not the college basketball podcast. This is the college football show. So I would say, I'm not having an iron in the fire on this one, but I think the professor is definitely on the right side here. Sure, you would think that Joe Moorhead is going to scheme something up like the first drive. Maybe they'll be able to move the ball, but after that, it's like once they get off script, what's Akron going to do against Michigan State, right? So,
and like I said, I just don't know how they stop them. I think Michigan State just scores touchdowns at will, and like I said, big plays and quickly too. I wouldn't touch this total because I have no idea if Michigan State's going to want to go out there and put up 50 or 60. If they want to, I think they can. I think it's score as quick as they want or as slow as they want, and like I said, I just think they're going to run all over them. 4 p.m. Eastern, Houston at Texas Tech. Thrilling game last year in Houston. The return visit.
And let the record show I was wrong about Houston's week 2 opponent. It is actually week 3 where Kansas is coming to town. So we have to wait one more week until the thing I've been previewing for the entire offseason until we get that Kansas at Houston matchup. So my apologies. I was 1 week early on that.
On pins and needles. This week we get what should be a good game in Lubbock. Texas Tech is a 2.5-point favorite. The model says it should be Texas Tech -4. It's an A pick for me on the Red Raiders at -2.5. The 2 most likely outcomes are Tech wins by 3 and Tech wins by 4. We're winners on both of those. So it's an A grade play for me at 3. It's a totally different story. I would still take Tech at 3, but it's a pick that I think is got a decent chance to push you. We talk about key numbers in college football. We talked about this before. The quick recap being 3 is the most important number in football. Condition on the 2 teams are relatively close in talent. It's not the most key number in Akron, Michigan State. That game is almost assuredly not going to end at 3. But in this game, 3 is an extremely likely outcome. 4 is a very likely outcome as well. 7, 6 also. Houston can win this game, but I think the probability that Tech wins this by 1 or 2, not very high, not impossible. We saw Houston win by 2 last week, so it is on the table. but I'll lay the 2.5 here with an A grade pick for Tech. Again, drops to a B grade pick really at 3 or 3.5, depending on where the number goes. But on the right side of 3 here, I think you got to take the home team. These two teams are pretty evenly matched to, both teams that if things start going right could see themselves in the top 25. As is, I think they're on the outside looking in for that discussion. But they two teams that got some possibilities, got some potential. Two teams that by the end of the season could diverge, and we could see one of these teams being a top 25 team and one of them being more in the middle of the pack in the 50s and 60s. So some question marks for sure. But I mean, at this point, I think right now we have to say our best guess is that they're pretty evenly matched. Give me the home team. Lubbock is one of the toughest places to play in. The travel is brutal out there in the middle of nowhere, West Texas. The fans are rabid by 4 p.m. Eastern, by 3 p.m. local time. Everybody in that city is going to be drunk. That's no offense if you live in Lubbock, but I mean, that's the joke around these parts. I mean, it's going to be a raucous atmosphere. Not as much as the night game, but it's still going to be pretty raucous out in the desert there. Give me the home team here laying 2.5. A grade pick for me on Tech. Cousin Jared, what do you think?
I just feel like I need to get that out of the way. I'm more of a flour tortilla guy. And so,
same.
So I get rid of the corn. If they're throwing tortillas at me, I want it to be the flour. So lost my best bet last week, laying the 4 points with Houston against UTSA. Who cares? That was a great game. That was well worth the cost of losing my best
cost bet. Of admission.
Yeah, to get a great game like that. So that was perfectly acceptable. This is one of those things where like I almost want to stick to my guns here. If this were 3, ironic talking about the Red Raiders, stick to my guns. I would almost want to take the 3 points with Houston here, just because I still that game really the first 2.5 quarters. I don't want to say it's going to define somebody's season. So I don't. My mind on Houston hasn't exactly been changed yet. But what has changed in my mind after last week is the Texas Tech offense. I think is going to be back to the Texas Tech offense that we saw in the late 90s, early to mid 2000s, and then with Cliff Kingsbury there, it could be just a whole lot of fun. Zach Kitley is the offensive coordinator there formerly of Western Kentucky with Bailey Zappi, and both formerly of Houston Baptist, where they were just throwing the ball around and putting up tons of points. And guess what? He goes to Texas Tech, and what they do, last weekend, they throw the ball around, put up tons of points. Yeah, it was against a not good team, but they ended up throwing for like 460 yards as a team or something like that. So their starting quarterback did get hurt, but the backup came in and threw for like 275 yards. Or something like that, because that's what Texas Tech quarterbacks do. That's
been like our whole lives. I feel like that's what Tech has done.
Exactly. So my favorite play here, and it's not there yet. If this total gets down to 65, which I don't know if it will, but if it gets back to 65, I like the over 65 here. It opened at 64, quickly jumped up to 66.5. There are a few places where it's 65.5. There is 164.5 out there, I believe, at FanDuel. Last time I checked, if you have access to FanDuel, I can get the over 64.5. I heartily endorse that. But the one that I'm definitely eyeing here is the over. And if you can get it at 65, that would be the play that I would make.
Usually when Cousin Jared recommends an over, I'm excited. I think the only thing I'm going to say to that one is humph. Houston over. I feel like I'm missing something here. I don't know what to do with that. Tech obviously bringing in a good offensive coordinator. What I will say also about Tech, a former Baylor assistant there, and Joe McGuire is the head coach, a defensive mastermind. And so I think that Tech defense is actually going to be pretty solid. Now, it may take a couple years for the recruits to get there. I think just as a side note, I think it's phenomenally interesting that the University of Texas, flagship university in the state, can't seem to find a competent head coach, and little old Baylor up the road finds Art Briles, who's a fantastic coach, less so as a human being. So that aside, on the football field, did wonders and produced a lot of assistant coaches who also knew their stuff football wise. Yeah, that whole thing happens, and rightfully the university moves on from him. It brings in Matt Rule, who does a fantastic job before moving on to the NFL, and now bringing on another coach who's already having now guys being poached by university. I just think it's fascinating. I don't want to get us too off course here, but it's just fascinating that Baylor somehow lucks into all these coaches who can provide coaching trees, whereas Texas can't seem to find a head coach. it's kind of wild to me.
Yeah, it is, and you could even take it a step further with UTSA getting Jeff Traylor, which obviously like Texas was never going to hire a guy like Jeff Traylor without that pedigree. But UTSA can find Jeff Traylor. I think Tech did a great job with McGuire. SMU going out to Dykes, and then TCU. UTEP getting Demo. TCU saying, "Hey, look, SMU did it right next door. I'm just going to take their coach." Like you see so many creative and innovative and smart decisions being made by all these universities in Texas with regards to their football program and Texas. You can't say at the time that those hires were bad necessarily, but it's just a combination of maybe not wonderful hires and then just completely not panning out. It's just, you're right, it's crazy.
Yeah, some uninspired hires. I will never forget watching the Charlie Strong coached Louisville teams, and that was of course when I've lost his name now. What's his face? The Heisman winning quarterback was there at Louisville.
Lamar Jackson.
I
think Lamar Jackson was after Strong.
Was after him?
Yeah.
I'm pretty sure he was there for one of those years. I just remember I think it was one of those years, or maybe it was the quarterback before. I just remember the Charlie Strong that last year when he was really good before he went to Texas and being like, man, this is all about the quarterback. This coach is clueless, but he's sure got a quarterback. And then Texas being like, we want that guy. And I'd be like, he had a quarterback, but I don't know if he had much more than that.
Right.
You're looking at right now, thankfully.
I am looking it up. I don't have. I'm not sure how quickly I'm going to be able to get you an answer here.
Anyway, on that one, while he's looking at, I'll just recap real quick again. I'm on Tech at -2.5. Like I said, I think the home team here makes a lot of sense. Because you're thinking about an over if it drops low enough. I do agree the Tech offense looks a lot better right now. I think their defense is going to come around and be pretty strong. I just don't know when it'll be. We'll find out a lot this week. It should be a really interesting game there in Lubbock. Moving on to the next one here, also at the same time slot, 4 p.m. Eastern. Iowa State at Iowa. And talking about last week, Iowa, I mean, do we need to say any more than just that? One of the teams took one of the biggest beatings in the power ratings based off of trying to lose to a fairly mediocre FCS team, a decent FCS team, but not like a top one.
No, not against a team that went to the Big Ten championship game last year.
Yeah. A game that we were one play away from it either being 4-3 or 5-3, both of which would have been incredible scores. I don't care which score is taken away. I just want one of them taken away. So this game could have been 4-3 or 5-3. I'm confused at this line. I think I'm confused at this line every year, and sometimes it's on either side.
Yes.
But this line always confuses me. It's always one of my most confident plays. I'd have to go back, but I feel like in the last 10 years, I'm like 80% on this game. They're always weird lines.
Yeah.
They're always like, what are people seeing that I'm not seeing?
It's because they're always two weird teams.
They're always two weird teams.
Weird.
They are weird for sure. The model thinks Iowa State's a better team than Iowa right now. So getting 3.5 on the road is a gift. It's an A-grade play for me. Iowa might win this game, but if they do, they might win at 7-3 and then we don't cover. But I'll take my chances with that and say that Iowa winning by more than a field goal doesn't seem very likely. It's an A-grade pick for me on the Cyclones. Model says this game should be basically a pick 'em. And I tend to agree that, the game's still in Iowa, which still matters. And Iowa's still probably not a terrible team. I mean, sleepwalking last week, blah, 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 who knows? But I mean, I don't see how you can, to me, if you're laying 3.5 with Iowa, you're just like just flipping the bird to last week and just being like, that meant nothing. And I'm like, I'll tell you, it means something. It's not everything. If that game meant everything, I would say this should be Iowa State -35, right? So it doesn't mean everything, but it means something how bad Iowa looked. And it wasn't just a score. It's just the offensive output that wasn't for Iowa. I don't understand this. I don't understand this total 40.5. This total should be in the 30s. This should not start with a 4, period. And I know that this is college football, but this total should not be in the 40s. I don't.
Now we know that there is like a limit on the whatever formula application that the books use to set totals for football games. There's a limit.
It's apparently 40.5. It's apparently 40.5. Yeah.
Yes. They cannot go lower than that. Yeah, we know that.
I would look under on this one as well. A great pick for me on the Cyclones again, getting 3.5. I would look money line plus odds. This feels a lot like the the Illinois, all the I schools, Illinois Indiana game from Friday, where if the refs could call a touchdown or the review booth could call a touchdown that was correct, Illinois wins that game. We still pushed at +3, but the same sort of situation. We were getting plus odds. I also think money line makes a lot of sense though. Either points or plus odds. This is a coin toss type game. But given what we saw from last week, maybe Iowa goes out and scores 20. And if so, hats off. But I don't see how they get to 20, given that they couldn't score a touchdown against, again, a mediocre FCS school. Iowa State's pretty decent. What do you think, Cousin Jared?
So many thoughts on this game. We'll go to a bad place first, and then I'll save us and bring us back from the depths here in a second. Right. I'm not going to say anything about this game. I don't have a play on it. Does anybody have a friend that's a lawyer? Because I need to know about the nepotism laws in Iowa specifically, because Kirk Ferentz's son is his offensive coordinator. And you tell me another reason why the Iowa offensive coordinator hasn't been fired at this point. I mean, it is just, and got to steal shamelessly from the Andy Staples show, because Andy Staples referenced this on his latest show. He played at Florida under Steve Spurrier. And, he said that sometimes a player would make a bad play and he would come back to the sidelines and Steve Spurrier would say, "Son, don't worry. That's not your fault. That's my fault for having you in there." And so at this point, I feel like that's just kind of where we're at with the Iowa offensive situation. Like, I don't know how else this is like the shadiest situation in all of college football, with Iowa having this awful offense and it being the head coach's son. Like, this is just super shady. Anyway, that's the end of the
Hold on. For the record, as a legal disclaimer, we are not claiming that anybody is breaking any laws. This is not libel. Please don't sue us.
But if you want to tell us how maybe some laws are being broken, we'd love to have you on. So anyway, so I'm going to bring us back from this dark place now. Teddy Bridgewater was the quarterback at Louisville.
Oh, okay. That was the one. There you go. There you go. I was thinking, I was like, some awesome quarterback who would just...
Yes, which makes sense because Bridgewater was drafted highly in the NFL. So
yes, and he was just running around like crazy. And I just remember the questionable decisions from the coach, but I mean, he just saved him because he was incredible. And he didn't have that at Texas, and now we've really, moving on to the night games here. 7 o'clock Eastern. Kentucky at Florida. Great win by Florida, beating Utah. This number's 5.5 right now. It's an A-grade pick for me on Kentucky at +5.5. The model says that Kentucky's a better team than Florida. Model has Kentucky ahead of Florida. Model says this should be a pick 'em. I would rather have 6. I wish I was getting 6. Mm-hmm. I don't see why we would get 6, as we talked about. Gosh, we're going to go down all the rabbit holes here for however, like all the 5 viewers who are left with us. How little closing line value means, how the closing lines are on average worse, and I got 2.5% or whatever closing line value in week 1, and how little that actually got us. Right. So that aside. Bottom line for me is I can't see why this number would go to 6. Like, I just don't see how you're betting Florida -5.5. I mean, maybe the allure of like, oh, look, I get to lay less than 5.5, but it like also matters who's playing. And we'll talk about that. And the last game that we cover with Mississippi State, Arizona, like you can't get too focused on key numbers. At some point you have to talk about like how much do you think they're going to win by? And if this was Florida -3, again, the model would still say grab the field goal with Kentucky, and I would too, but at least I understand laying 3, having that push protection there. I don't understand why you think Florida is going to win by this much. I was on Florida last week with a B-grade pick, contrary to what Jake was on here saying. I think, Cousin Jared, I think you were scared of the Florida pick as well. So I was on Florida last week, and I'm high. That's the thing I want to make sure people understand here. I'm high on Utah, and I still picked Florida, and now I'm picking Kentucky. This isn't about like I hate one of these teams or whatever. This is about this number's too high. Kentucky's a solid team. I do think that Kentucky probably not quite as good as last year's team, but I think all these SEC teams are all pretty solid, pretty close to each other. A lot's going to be about the schedule. Florida might absolutely win this game, but they might win by 3. They might win by 4, and 5.5 wins. So again, I'd love to see a 6. I can't see why people would bet, unless it's funny money moving the line around, which who knows, why people would bet this up to 6. You never know, but it seems crazy to me. Again, model thinks this should be Florida minus a point or something like that. I can see Florida -3. I don't think that's a crazy number, but you also have to remember Kentucky basically had a bye week in week 1. Got to pull all their starters, after about the midway point of the third quarter. Take plays off, whatever, start cycling guys in. That game was out of, not in contention. Florida, obviously, again, like you said, the body blow theory, playing a hard one there, coming off of that. I'm not saying they're going to sleepwalk this. This is a big game for Florida, absolutely. I just think 5.5 is too many. And Florida may win by 6 or 7, but I think they may also win by 3 or 4. And Kentucky might go on the road and win. I'm not as confident in this one as saying in Vanderbilt, though, getting that W. But I think Kentucky might win this game. A-grade pick for me at Kentucky at +5.5. Cousin Jared, what do you think?
Well, what I would say, first of all, join our Patreon and get access to our Discord, where I am kind of discussing some of the opening lines as they come out, as I'm able to. This line did open at 6. You were getting the 6 with Kentucky early. Some people here may have been able to grab it at 6.
I'm about to say, I remember there's a message in there. You're like, Kentucky 6, grab 6.
Yeah. And so now down to 5.5. I like it a lot less at 5.5. Obviously, I am going to kind of stick with my guns here, and I am going to take the under 52 in this game. We've talked a lot about Kentucky and how I am not super high on their offense this year. And they went under their last game. We played under 55 with them against Miami of Ohio. It ended up getting to 50, but the only reason they got to 50 was they had a kickoff return for a touchdown, and Miami had a turnover like really deep in their own territory. Kentucky was
right after that. Yeah, the first minute of the third quarter, Kentucky got 14 points.
Yeah,
and from that, like you said, this game's in the mid-30s.
Yeah, exactly. 14 points in one minute there at the beginning of the fourth quarter, and that game still easily went under the 55. Maybe not comfortably, but they never really threatened to score there in the second half of the fourth quarter. So I'm sticking to my guns on that. I think that the Kentucky offense is still a little bit overrated, and I think huge opportunity for Florida to come out a little hungover after that performance against Utah. I know this game's at home. That definitely helps them, but I can see them definitely getting to a slow start. Full disclosure, Anthony Richardson he looked amazing, and he is the type of player that could just single-handedly blow up and under at a number like 52. But
that Kentucky defense, I think, is good enough to limit the damage. You're never going to completely shut down a guy of that caliber, but you can limit the damage, and the Kentucky defense is one that can do that, right?
Yeah. Well, yeah, you're right. They can. I'm just telling you, as somebody who likes to play unders, there are certain players that just give you
gotta watch out
heartburn. And it just makes it super uncomfortable. And he definitely could be one of those players. So I'm sticking to my guns here. I'm going with the under 52. I think that there's going to be value on the Kentucky totals here at the beginning part of the season, at least, either until the books correct or Kentucky gets things rolling, which is completely possible. Again, at 6, I think it's a really tough decision for me to choose between taking the points and taking the under. But at 5.5, I'm going to stick with the total and take the under 52.
I want to talk real quick, too, about Billy Napier coaching at Florida. A guy who well revered for what he did for Louisiana. At the end of the Utah game, playing things extremely conservative by deciding to basically forego the possibility that his team didn't score a touchdown, burn more clock, and basically gave it where if they didn't score a touchdown, the game was over. As opposed to pushing it and saying, if we don't score a touchdown, we still have them pin deep, can call our timeouts, etc. I also have to wonder about your underplay if that conservative nature also lends itself more to a lower scoring game, because he's one that's more like, I'm going to take my one shot, and the guy who's going to take his one shot and that's it isn't looking for a lot of shots on goal, tends to be more of another situation. So I think that's kind of an extra side note there to go along with your thinking there in the under 52.
Well, and really to get us way sidetracked here, that is the case, but sometimes it just doesn't present itself the way that you think it does, because I took the over in the Ole Miss Troy game, and the things that I mentioned was Ole Miss being inexperienced together, having to keep the starters in longer, they'll play longer, they'll score more points, and Troy will not have incompetent coaching anymore and will be more aggressive. And all of those things happened Ole Miss's offense played almost the entire game together. Troy was going for it on fourth downs, and there were still stupid things that happened that just completely blew all of that up. And so that's one of those things that you definitely keep in mind. And I think more times than not, it's going to work out well for you. But there's just some times where it just makes no sense and it doesn't matter at all. And that's just part of this sports betting thing.
Absolutely. And I think again, now I'm going to take us even one step further, then we're going to come back. But I do think that sort of thing happens more in football because the fact that when you score lots of points at one time, whereas in a sport like basketball and a sport like baseball, it tends to be a little bit less magnified, or at least in baseball, it's magnified. Right. You have so many games to overcome that, whereas in football you don't. But I was thinking about that this weekend. That that's why it's really important to. You don't have to watch every game, but at least important to look into the box score, look into the turnovers, look into the yards, look into that sort of stuff, because you have to figure out when you've won because you got lucky and you should change your thinking versus when you've won and you nailed the handicap and you should carry on. When you lost because you got unlucky and you shouldn't deviate because things played out like you thought and it's going to work out versus when you lost and you just missed the handicap. And all of those four things happen. And trying to figure that out is very important, especially early on in the season, because it's really important early on in the season. I hear people say all the time, just a quick little betting nugget here. I hear people say early in the season, I hear a lot of, don't be afraid to change your mind on a team early on. And I completely agree. You shouldn't be afraid to, but you also have to figure out when you should stick to your guns and say, no, I'm seeing this correctly. It's just not playing out right. But my opinion is right. The game just aren't playing out that way, because if you change your opinion too much, you just overreact. You're just flip-flopping all over the place. You're going to find yourself on the wrong end of a lot of things. So you have to figure out, and it's tough. That's why I built the model, to try to help us figure out who we should have strong opinions on and who we should react to quickly and change our opinions on. That's a tough thing here.
Yep.
7 p.m. Eastern, Syracuse, talked about them at the top, looking really good at home against the Connecticut team that ranked 121st. UConn.
That is a step up for sure.
That is a massive step up. I mean, congrats to UConn for not being like in the Final Four. The worst teams in football. Still obviously very bad. The model says it should be Syracuse minus 22.3. It's a solid 4% edge here on the Orange. I know that Syracuse had a big win, a conference game there early on, but I just think that as good as UConn has looked, I still think there's a ceiling to how good they're going to be able to be this year. I think Syracuse is a solid team. 19.5 is not low enough. It's an A-grade play specifically because the key numbers that we're crossing, that we're always talking about across, is two extremely key numbers of 20 and 21. If you wanted to make this a B-grade pick, I think that's fine too. This just feels like a game that I'd rather play the third unit now ahead of time at 19.5, knowing that we're on the right side of 20 and 21, and see how the number moves. There's a decent chance this number gets bigger. Again, people tend to play more favorites throughout the week. And if that's the case, and this number gets up to 20.5, 21.5, you have the opportunity to go for a middle buyback out of some of it, maybe not all of it. You just got options on the table. So this number may sit here. It may go down. You never really know. I'm not trying to predict that, but I think 19.5 is too low, and I'd rather get that third unit down. And then we've got options throughout the week, depending on exactly what happens. Again, knowing that we're barely on the right side of two really likely numbers for this game in 20 and 21. Total of this game's 51. Cousin Jared, what do you got for us?
Syracuse is one of those teams where you will never get me to lay this many points with Syracuse, just because you never know.
Even against UConn,
even against UConn in this situation, yes, I would not, just because UConn didn't look like the 127th worst team against Utah State. Which, who knows, what do you know about Utah State after?
Also, Utah State, I mean, I don't want to get side too strong on this one, but Utah State, I'm not surprised that Alabama beat them and covered. I'm not surprised. The way they did that, I mean, Utah State, maybe that says more about Utah State than we thought it did. We thought at the first it said something about UConn. Maybe it doesn't say anything about UConn. Maybe it says more about Utah State.
Yeah, but where I'm going with this, I don't trust Syracuse as far as I can throw them. And I think that with Jim Mora being at UConn, I think at the very least, in his first season. Like maybe he's just like every other coach that's been through there, where ultimately it's just like you just kind of throw your hands up and you're not going to be able to accomplish what you want to accomplish just because it's such a tough place. But I think everybody's still playing really hard and buying into what he's selling at this point. So this to me seems like ripe for a backdoor cover where Syracuse gets up 24 points and UConn scores a touchdown with 3 minutes left in the game or something like that. So again, people, I would probably tell you do as the model does, don't do as I do. I have a hard time laying numbers this large, even with some bad teams sometimes. But this just seems like a spot to me where I feel like there's lots of ways where there's some sort of weird, crazy cover at the end of the game that just infuriates you. And you wonder, why did I lay 20 points with Syracuse?
Given that it's Syracuse, it's very possible. Also, UConn can lose any game by 40, and I don't think
that is true.
That is true. That on the table too. So, 7:30 Eastern start time. Georgia Southern at Nebraska.
I want to hear what the professor has to say on this one.
Okay, here you go. Georgia Southern, not terrible. Nebraska, also not terrible.
Horrible.
Why is this a 21.5-point spread? I mean, my goodness. The model says 10.7. Nebraska was tied with North Dakota in the third quarter, I believe.
Mm-hmm.
North Dakota is not good.
In North, this is North Dakota, not North Dakota State.
North Dakota State, very good.
Very
North
good.
Dakota, North Dakota State would be ranked ahead of 40 teams probably in it.
Yeah.
Given what we saw with James Madison, maybe more than that, right?
Yeah.
North Dakota not good. This is, Nebraska. How about this? Nebraska plays Vanderbilt on a neutral field.
Uh-huh.
Who wins that game?
I still think Nebraska wins it. Okay, so
but you're thinking about it.
Yeah. Okay. Are you? Have you? Is that your pitch? Have you sold me, or do you?
My pitch is the model has Nebraska at 62, and I don't think that's crazy. I don't think Nebraska's very good. I think they're just a middle of the road team at this point.
Yeah.
I think they, like a lot of teams in that division of the Big Ten, might accidentally win the division because none of them are very good. But I just don't think Nebraska's very good. Georgia Southern is ranked in the top 100. I don't think they're very good, but I mean, they're 30 spots behind them, and you just cannot convince me that a difference of 30 teams in the middle of college football, at the very top and very bottom, absolutely, very top to bottom, very top 30 teams. When you talk about Alabama or Georgia versus a team not in the top 25, 21.5 points at home, sure, but in the middle, the teams clump up. I think Georgia Southern's got a pulse. I just don't think Nebraska is good enough to be favored by 21.5. Hook here is what gets me. Again, the model says it should be 11. Now 11 is probably too low. If it was 11, I think that's I wouldn't agree with that. But honestly, at 14, even at 14, I'd consider taking Georgia Southern. I just don't believe in Nebraska at this point. I have no idea where their heads are at. I have no idea where their coaches' heads are at. Who's updating their resume at this point? That is just a disaster. And we saw it last week against North Dakota. 21.5 is acting as if we have no data from Nebraska this season. And if we had no data from this season, I would say sure, but we have data for this season. And it's somehow worse than last year was. So 21.5 is just a crazy number for me.
Well,
it's an A-grade pick for me grabbing all these points.
And even if you just look at the last 6 quarters that they've played, take out the first half of the game against Northwestern. I mean, what does that do to it? If you just look at those last
it's even worse.
Yeah. Okay. So this line just seems like way weird. Like something's going on here. And so what I will equate this to and in this scenario, I probably miss a good number here with the 21.5. And so I will upfront tell you that this is probably going to cost me. But I would look at this similar to how I looked at the Buffalo, Maryland line from this past week, where it was one of those things where the model was like, hey, this is an A-grade play. This is a huge edge. You got to make this. And to me, it almost seemed too good to be true. I was able to cross-reference it with some other projections that are out there, do some more research throughout the week. And you say, okay, okay, yeah, maybe the professor's model here is a little bit higher on, let's say, Buffalo than the others, but it still crossed so many key numbers, even if it was off by a little bit, that it was a play that you had to make. So I find this being
And
the
Buffalo
Saints,
won, which was exciting.
yeah, they did. They covered, and so
Yeah,
this is one of those things where it's the same thing. I'll probably do the same thing this week. I'll compare this number to some of the other stuff that's out there, and stick around later in the week on one of the shows here. I'll kind of give us an update on where we're at, and if it's the same thing where there's multiple other systems out there, all the other information I have is saying the same thing. Maybe it's not the exact same thing, but still crossing a lot of key numbers. Then I will make that play. But it's just one of those things where this seems so fishy and off that it's something that I'm just, on a Sunday night after these lines have just been out for a few hours, I'm not jumping at this yet, just because it seems too good to be true.
I'm going the other direction. I'm jumping and saying, you gave me the hook. Let's do it. I'm in. I'm biting.
Yeah, okay.
I'm biting hard.
There you go.
All right, last one for this show, a late night game. Should be an interesting one in the deserts, 11 p.m. Eastern. Mississippi State at Arizona, an Arizona team that's jumping a lot after a convincing road victory at San Diego State, a San Diego State team that we thought would be decent this year. Obviously a group of 5 team, so not one that we thought was automatically top 40, but a decent team, one that had a solid defense from a year ago, christening the new stadium at home, and Arizona just went in and thumped them. And because you talked about it, you thought you were a little bit higher on Arizona than most, and I said I agreed. I just still was thinking it's like a 2.5 win total for a reason. The way Arizona is looking right now, you got to really like your chances if you took that season over on that win total, because they're looking, again, competent. Model still has them ranked 83rd. So Model still says, again, the Pac-12 is barely a Power 5 conference anymore, and they're still towards the bottom of it. They're still going to struggle in their conference games. But again, a team that had a respectable showing for sure looked really good in that first game against Mississippi State, who the Model, lo and behold, ranks them 10th now after that impressive beatdown of Memphis, and the team you also were high on as well. You like Mississippi State from the very start. The Model, as much as it has given Arizona a boost from last week, still says Mississippi State is by far the better team. Model says it should be Mississippi State minus 16. So minus 8.5 is an A-grade play. It's a massive edge on Mississippi State, of course. Road game, that's taken into account by the Model. Benefit here, road game at late night as opposed to earlier in the day. Players' body clocks do better later rather than earlier. If this was the other situation where Arizona was going to Mississippi State playing at 11 a.m. or something, that's a whole lot worse. So this travel shouldn't be as bad. 8.5 is kind of a dead number. It's not really close to anything key. But as I mentioned earlier, sometimes you got to stop overthinking key numbers. You can't. Yeah. You can't not look at that, but sometimes you got to stop thinking about it and just say, how much do you think they're going to win by? And Mississippi State, even though 8.5 is not really close to a key number, I think if you're holding out for 7, I think you're greedy. And I think you need to take a good hard look in the mirror and just be happy with what you got. And the fact you're only having to lay an 8.5 here, I think you should be happy with that, because I really think this number should be well over 10. Again, I think Model says 16, 13 or 14 would be a whole lot better of a number for this one. Even 10 or 11. The fact that it's single digits, and 9, not really a key number, but like games do finish on 9. More likely to be 9 than 1, 2, or 5, right? So I mean, 9 on the table, and if they were my 9 more winners, of course, like I said, 10, 11, 13, 14, 17. I mean, Mississippi State, Arizona much better, but Mississippi State is just not just in a different class. They're like multiple class jumps ahead of Arizona. I'm all over Mississippi State here, closing this out late night Saturday, hopefully with an easy winner. Hopefully they run away with this. Hopefully they're by 30 by the half, and then we can all just go to bed and assume that we'll wake up with more money in our accounts than the night before. Because what do you got for us on this one?
Yeah, I got a lot of thoughts on this one. First thing I would say is, yes, I was higher on Arizona, and let's just say that the Model still is underestimating Arizona because of all those priors where they were apparently a much worse football team than they are now. But what I would say to that is that even if Arizona is, let's just say, 2 points better than what the Model says, you're still looking at a projection of 2 touchdowns. They 14. Should be favored by getting 14 points or so, and so there's still tons of value there, even if you think that the Model hasn't caught up with Arizona. But I mean, I'm super excited that Arizona was good. It makes me look smart.
There you go.
The other thing I would say about Mississippi State, and the reason that I'm a little bit concerned as a fellow, another team that's in the SEC West here with A&M, I mentioned that I thought that if Mississippi State was going to have a good season. I think it's because their defense was going to be good. The Mike Leach offenses at Mississippi State have been inconsistent. Like they haven't.
I was hit or miss.
Yeah, they've just been a little bit.
Every once in a while they look pretty good, and every once in a while they look really like they disappear for stretches.
Yeah, and a perfect example was this Memphis game last season where it was just up and down, crazy. A team that they had a lot more firepower than Memphis, but let Memphis stay in the game. And
not what happened. Not what happened yesterday.
Not what happened. And plenty of people talked about it. Will Rogers, third season in Mike Leach's system. All the quarterbacks that have been in Mike Leach's system for like 3 years. It's like this ridiculous list of like Cliff Kingsbury and Graham Harrell and Luke Falk, like all these players that are, all over the record books of college football. And so
you talked about this last week.
And if Rogers is going, obviously, maybe not to the level of those 3 players, but if he is going to take that type of step forward with this offense, and like I said, I think Mississippi State has a good defense. I think this is going to be a team to reckon with. So for me, as much as it pains me to go against a team that I've been high on in Arizona, this is one of those things where I just think Mississippi State is in a completely different class than Arizona, a different class than what San Diego State was last week. And I think that they're going to be able to handle this game pretty easily. So I am laying the 8.5 points. And you mentioned a dead number. This is not going to 7. Like don't try to convince yourself.
That's what I said. I think you're getting greedy if that's what you're hoping for.
Like this could go to 10, maybe even like 11, and it wouldn't surprise me. So just take the 8.5 while you can and put it in your back pocket and wait for Saturday.
And as we talk about, sometimes every once in a while we're wrong on these, or the number goes towards the model, 2 out of 3 times, 3 out of 4 times, whatever. So I mean, every once in a while it goes the other direction. But yeah, I'm like you. I would, if this number closes at 10 or 11, I still think I would lay 10 or 11. I think 13 or 14 are the 2 most likely outcomes in this game. But I would be like, that at least makes sense. We're going in the right direction, as opposed to if this goes down to 7, I would just be floored. Right. Will Rogers may be able to take a step and join the ranks of those quarterbacks with regards to talent, maybe not with regards to the production because the conferences are playing in, but I do think that's an important note. Like, I absolutely think that he can become as good as those other quarterbacks were, but playing in a completely different scenario, because the Big 12 now has a couple defenses every once in a while here now, but some of those Big 12s you were talking about before, and the Pac-12, we were talking about Leach at Washington State, right? The teams that are playing there are a whole different caliber. So absolutely, I think Rogers has a chance to become as good as those guys. Just you won't see it in the record in the stat sheet because of the competition being so much different. That's all the games we're going to cover today in this episode. We've got more to come later in the week. We'll cover every single game. Again, that is FBS versus FBS. Before we head out, Cousin Jared, any parting words?
No parting words. Excited. The college football season is here. Let's keep it going.
All right. Well, that's all we have for you today. Thanks for tuning in to another episode of Picks with the Professor. Remember to check out the Google Sheet for model picks, projections, and results. You can find the one for baseball and college football. All that's on the website, www.pickswiththeprofessor.com. If you haven't done so yet, please click that subscribe button to ensure all the sports betting content we provide on this channel is dropped right into your feed. We'll see you again later this week for more college football betting content, and all week for more MLB content. Until we see you again, best of luck, and remember, you can eat your betting money, but please don't bet your eating money.